soldier finds his retired, canine dog, starving on the streets. What happens next is shocking. There are ghosts that walk among us. Not spirits of the dead, but the hollowed-out shells of men who have seen too much. Jake Riley was one such man, a soldier forged in the crucible of war, now living a quiet life of exile in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. He sought silence, but found only the echoes of explosions and the phantom bark of a partner he was forced to leave behind. One frigid afternoon in a forgotten town, fate offered him a cruel mirror. Cowering by a dumpster, a specter of a dog, ribs stark against matted fur. It was a ghost of a warrior, defeated not by battle, but by neglect, and in its haunted eyes Jake saw a reflection of his own broken soul. It couldn't be, but it was. It was Aries. Before we begin, take a moment and comment your city below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from around the world. Now, let's dive in. The name Aries had once been a declaration of power. On the dusty plains of Afghanistan, Sergeant Jake Riley and his K-9 partner Aries were a legendary unit. Aries, a magnificent German shepherd with a coat of sable and obsidian, was more than a dog. He was an extension of Jake's own senses, a four-legged guardian angel who could sniff out death hidden beneath the sand. They had saved countless lives, their bond forged in the silent language of trust and sealed under the relentless sun of deployment. Aries wasn't just a tool of war. He was Jake's confidant, the silent keeper of his fears in the dead of night, the one steady presence in a world of chaos. Their war ended together, with the deafening roar of an IED. The blast had thrown them both. Jake woke up to the sterile white of a military hospital, his leg shattered and his career over. Aries, who had shielded him from the worst of the shrapnel, was also injured. A hero. When Jake was medically discharged, the real heartbreak began. Due to the complex military protocols and Aries' own recovery, Jake wasn't allowed to adopt his partner immediately. He was promised that Aries would be retired to a loving, carefully vetted family. "He'll have a hero's retirement, son. A big yard, a warm bed. He's earned it," the commanding officer had said, his words meant to be a comfort but feeling like a betrayal. Jake, carrying the heavy coins of his trauma, the PTSD, the limp, the survivor's guilt, retreated. He couldn't bear the sirens of the city or the well-meaning but empty platitudes of friends. He bought a small, isolated cabin deep in the Colorado wilderness, a place where the only sounds were the wind in the pines and the crackle of his own lonely fire. He was a ghost in his own life, haunted by the memory of a dog whose fate he could only imagine. He'd sent letters, made calls, but the bureaucracy was a fortress. Eventually, the updates stopped. He was forced to believe the story he'd been told, that Aries was happy, somewhere else, with someone else. 2 years passed. 2 years of wrestling with nightmares and trying to piece together a life from the fragments of the man he used to be. The winters were the hardest, the suffocating silence of the snow-covered landscape, mirroring the emptiness inside him. It was on one of these bleak winter days that his supplies ran low, forcing him into the small, gritty town of Havenwood, a place that felt as forgotten as he did. As he loaded bags of flour and cans of beans into his old pickup truck, a movement by the alley of a dingy diner caught his eye. It was a dog, or what was left of one. The animal was a skeletal framework of matted fur. Its head hung low in utter surrender. Its movements were slow, pained, each step a monumental effort. People walked past, averting their eyes. The dog was invisible, a piece of living refuse. Jake's heart, a muscle he thought had atrophied, gave a painful lurch. He had a soft spot for strays, for anything broken. He walked closer, his boots crunching on the dirty, salt-strewn snow. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse. The dog flinched, cowering back, expecting a blow. Its eyes, cloudy with hunger and despair, met his. And in that instant, the world stopped. Beneath the grime and the pain, there was a familiarity, the proud set of the ears, though one was torn, the faint sable pattern under the mud, the intelligent depth in those eyes, a light that even starvation couldn't completely extinguish. Jake's breath hitched. "No," he whispered, the word a puff of white in the cold air. "It can't be." He knelt down, his bad leg screaming in protest. He ignored it. He looked at the dog's torn ear, a scar he knew intimately. It was from a training exercise, a mock takedown that had gotten a little too real. He remembered cleaning that very wound himself. Aries? The name was a prayer, a ghost on his lips. At the sound, the dog's entire demeanor shifted. The defeated slump lessened. The head lifted a fraction of an inch. A low, guttural whimper escaped its throat, a sound of profound, heart-shattering recognition. The tail, a pitiful muddy rope, gave a single weak thump against the frozen ground. It was him, his partner, his hero. The dog, he was told, was living a life of luxury. Here, starving to death behind a greasy spoon diner. The rage that filled Jake was a white-hot inferno, burning away the fog of his PTSD, the years of apathy, in a single, clarifying blast. This wasn't just neglect. This was a desecration. Without a second thought, he shrugged off his thick flannel jacket and gently wrapped it around the trembling, emaciated body. Aries, too weak to resist, leaned into the familiar scent of the man he thought he'd lost forever. Jake scooped him up, the dog weighing almost nothing, a fragile collection of bones. As he carried his friend to the truck, the whimper in Aries's chest turned into a soft, continuous cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief that broke Jake's heart into a million pieces. Back at the cabin, the work began. The place was sparse, but it was warm. Jake laid Aries on a soft blanket by the hearth, the fire casting a gentle glow on his ravaged form. Every rib was visible. His paws were cracked and bleeding. There were sores on his skin, a testament to sleeping on frozen ground. Jake became the man he once was, a caregiver, a protector. He cleaned Aries's wounds with the focused precision of a combat medic. He warmed some broth, feeding it to him in small, careful spoonfuls, knowing that too much food too soon could kill him. For days, Jake didn't sleep. He sat by the fire, watching Aries's chest rise and fall, his hand resting on the dog's frail body, as if he could will his own strength into him. Slowly, miraculously, Aries began to return. The light in his eyes grew stronger. He started to drink water on his own. After a week, he could stand, albeit on wobbly legs. He would follow Jake around the small cabin, his shadow just like before. The bond, frayed by time and cruelty, was weaving itself back together, stronger than ever. As Aries regained his physical strength, his training began to resurface. He would sit at attention when Jake gave a silent hand signal, a reflex ingrained in his very being. His ears would perk at the sound of a twig snapping outside, his body instantly alert, scanning the perimeter. He was still a soldier, deep down. And watching him, Jake felt a flicker of his old self, too. The purpose that had been missing for 2 years was now sleeping by his fire. But a dark question hung in the air, as heavy and oppressive as the winter storms that rolled down the mountains. How? How does a decorated war hero, a K-9 promised a life of honor, end up like this? Someone had adopted Aries. Someone had been given the sacred trust of caring for him, and they had thrown him away like garbage. The answer to that question, Jake suspected, lay somewhere in the dark, snow-laden woods that surrounded his isolated sanctuary. He began to notice things. Strange tracks in the snow that weren't from any deer or elk. The distant, angry buzz of a snowmobile at odd hours of the night. One afternoon, while walking the edge of his property, Aries leading the way, the dog stopped dead. His nose twitched, and a low, serious growl rumbled in his chest. Jake looked down and saw it. A crude wire snare, half buried in the snow, an illegal poaching trap. The pieces started to click into place. The cruelty it took to leave a dog to starve was the same kind of cruelty it took to leave an animal to die in a snare. He was living on the edge of someone's dirty secret. And now, by saving Aries, he had likely made himself a part of it. The first confrontation came without warning. It was a Tuesday, the sky a brilliant, unforgiving blue. Jake was outside chopping wood, the rhythmic thud of the axe a kind of therapy. Aries was nearby, no longer a frail patient but a watchful guardian, his coat beginning to regain its luster. A mud-splattered truck, a model much newer than anything in Havenwood, rumbled up the unplowed track to his cabin. 2 men got out. The one driving was big and burly, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the rain. He had cold, dead eyes. The passenger was younger, wiry, with a nervous energy that made Jake's instincts hum with caution. Aries didn't bark. He stood, planted himself between Jake and the newcomers, and the growl that escaped his lips was not loud, but it was the most menacing sound Jake had ever heard. It was the sound that preceded an attack. "Easy there, dog," the big man said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He glanced from Aries to Jake, a flicker of something, recognition, assessment, in his eyes. "That's some animal you got there. Where'd you get him?" "Found him," Jake said, his hand not leaving the handle of the axe. He kept his stance neutral, non-threatening, but every muscle was coiled tight. "Found him?" The big man, who introduced himself as Silas, chuckled humorlessly. His younger companion, Billy, just shifted his weight from foot to foot, avoiding eye contact. "Funny thing, we lost a dog a few weeks back. Looks a hell of a lot like him. Even got the torn ear." Jake's blood ran cold. The lie was so blatant, so audacious. These were the men. He knew it with a certainty that was absolute. These were the monsters who had left Aries to die. "He was half-starved when I found him," Jake said, his voice dangerously level. "Looked like he hadn't eaten in a month." Silas shrugged, a theatrical gesture of indifference. "He was always a runner. More trouble than he was worth. We paid good money for him, though. The adoption agency said he was some kind of hero dog." He spat on the snow. Useless for hunting. Too smart for his own good. Wouldn't listen to anyone but his first owner, they said. The confession, wrapped in a complaint, sent a shockwave of fury through Jake. They knew. They knew his history, and they still did this. "We'll give you $100 for our trouble," Silas said, reaching for his wallet. "We want our dog back." Aries's growl deepened. A clear answer. Jake's answer was just as clear. "He's not your dog. Not anymore. Now get off my property." Silas's eyes narrowed into slits. The folksy demeanor vanished, replaced by sheer menace. "You're a long way from anywhere, old-timer. Things happen out here. People get lost, especially people who don't know how to mind their own business." He stared hard at Aries. And dogs that make too much noise have a way of getting silenced. The threat was unambiguous. They weren't just poachers. They were violent men used to getting their own way. They got back in their truck, Silas staring Jake down the entire time, and drove off, leaving the silence of the woods feeling heavy and charged. The incident shattered Jake's fragile peace. His home, his sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The PTSD came roaring back, but this time it was different. It wasn't the formless terror of memory. It was a sharp, focused alertness. He was no longer a victim of his past. He was a soldier on watch. He began to reinforce the cabin. He checked the locks, barricaded the weaker windows at night, and kept his old hunting rifle clean and close. He and Aries started doing patrols of the property line, a silent two-man reconnaissance team. They found more snares and even the remnants of a kill site. A butchered elk, its head and antlers gone, the rest left to rot. This was bigger than just a few illegal traps. This was a professional operation. Aries was fully transformed. The warrior was back. His eyes were sharp, his movements fluid and confident. He was Jake's early warning system. One night, a low growl from Aries woke Jake from a fitful sleep. Jake crept to the window and saw them, two figures, moving like shadows at the edge of the woods, using night vision goggles. They were watching his cabin, probing his defenses. The fear was a cold knot in Jake's stomach, but something else was there too. A grim resolve. He wouldn't run. He had run from his life for 2 years. He had left his partner once before, not by choice, but he wouldn't fail him again. This cabin, this small patch of land, was his Alamo, and he would defend it. The psychological warfare continued. One morning, he found a dead coyote in one of his own traps near the cabin, a clear message. Another time, his generator was sabotaged. They were trying to break him, to make him flee and leave the dog behind. Every move they made, however, only solidified Jake's determination. He was protecting more than just a dog now. He was protecting the last, best part of himself. He was fighting for his own redemption. Billy, the younger poacher, seemed to be the weak link. Jake saw him once near the property line, his face a mask of conflict. He looked scared. Jake knew that type. Not a leader, but a follower, caught up in something over his head. But Silas was different. He was the predator, and he was just waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment, Jake knew, would come with the storm. The forecast called for a blizzard, a once-in-a-decade monster that would dump feet of snow and cut off all roads. It was the perfect cover. No one could get in. No one could get out. And no one would hear him scream. The sky began to bleed gray 2 days later. The wind picked up, a low, mournful howl that promised violence. The first flakes of snow, fat and wet, began to fall. The blizzard was coming. Jake worked with a feverish intensity. He secured the storm shutters on the windows, brought in the last of the firewood, and filled every available container with water. The cabin was plunged into a premature twilight. Aries stuck to him like glue, a constant low growl rumbling in his chest. He could feel it too. The air was thick with impending conflict. The last sliver of daylight vanished, and the storm hit with the force of a physical blow. The wind shrieked, tearing at the cabin, and the snow came down in a blinding, horizontal sheet. The world outside was reduced to a swirling vortex of white and black. They were completely and utterly alone. Jake sat in his armchair, the rifle across his lap, his senses on high alert. Every creak of the old cabin, every moan of the wind was a potential threat. Hours passed. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the howling gale. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe they wouldn't dare come out in this. It was Aries who proved him wrong. The dog shot up from his spot by the fire, his body rigid, his gaze locked on the back door that led to a small, enclosed woodshed. He didn't make a sound, but every muscle in his body screamed danger. Jake followed his gaze. The door was rattling, but not from the wind. It was a rhythmic, metallic sound. Someone was working on the lock. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. They weren't making a frontal assault. They were being tactical, using the storm for cover, attacking the cabin's weakest point. And in that moment, the ghost of Jake Riley died, and Sergeant Riley was reborn. The fog of his PTSD, the years of lethargy and depression, burned away, replaced by the ice-cold clarity of combat. His mind wasn't a whirlwind of trauma anymore. It was a map of the battlefield. His cabin. His mission, repel boarders, protect the asset. The asset was Ares. He moved without thinking, his body remembering the drills, the endless training. He put a finger to his lips, a silent command to Ares, who immediately dropped into a low crouch, his eyes still fixed on the door. Quiet. Jake slipped through the cabin, his limp barely noticeable, his movements economical and silent. He grabbed the heaviest cast-iron skillet from the kitchen and positioned himself against the wall next to the woodshed door. He wasn't a civilian anymore. He was a soldier defending his fortress. The lock on the woodshed door finally gave with a dull click. Slowly, the door creaked open. A figure cloaked in snow and darkness slipped inside. It was Billy, the younger one, his face pale with fear and cold. He held a pistol, but he held it like he was afraid of it. He was the point man, sent in to open the main cabin door from the inside. Jake held his breath. He could hear Silas's muffled voice outside, lost in the wind. Billy took a hesitant step toward the interior door, his boots crunching on the wood chips. This was the turning point. Jake could stay hidden, wait for them to breach the main room, or he could seize the initiative. He chose the latter. With a speed that defied his injured leg, he lunged from the shadows. He didn't use the skillet to strike. He used it to hook Billy's gun hand, twisting it with brutal efficiency. The pistol clattered to the floor. Before Billy could even cry out, Jake had him in a chokehold, his other hand clamped over his mouth. "Don't make a sound," Jake hissed in his ear, his voice the pure, cold command of an NCO. Billy, terrified and overpowered, went limp, shaking his head frantically. Jake dragged him into the main room, away from the door, and shoved him into a chair. "Who else?" Jake demanded. Just Silas," Billy stammered, his eyes wide with terror. "He's at the front door. He told me to let him in." Just then, a heavy thud shook the front of the cabin. "Billy, what's taking so long? Open the door." Silas's voice was a furious roar, barely audible over the storm. Jake looked at the trembling young man, then at Ares, who was still in a low crouch, poised for action. He had neutralized the first threat and gained a tactical advantage. The fight wasn't over, but he had drawn the line. He wasn't just weathering the storm anymore. He was the storm. "Tell him you're having trouble with the bolt," Jake ordered, his voice low and urgent. He pushed Billy toward the front door. "Make it sound good." Billy, his face a mess of fear and snot, stumbled to the door. It's stuck, Silas. This old bolt is frozen solid," he yelled, his voice cracking. Outside, Silas cursed, a string of profanities swallowed by the wind. "Useless. Stand back." There was a deafening boom as Silas fired a shotgun blast directly at the lock. Wood splintered inwards. A second blast, and the door shuddered, hanging open on a single, screaming hinge. A wall of snow and wind flooded the entrance. Silas stood there, a hulking silhouette against the swirling white, shotgun held at the ready. "Get out of the way, kid," he roared at Billy. Jake didn't wait. "Ares, wach!" It was the German command for guard, but to Ares it meant engage. From the shadows, a black and sable blur erupted. Ares moved with a speed and ferocity that was breathtaking. He wasn't a pet. He was a weapon system. He ignored Billy and launched himself directly at Silas. He didn't go for the throat. His training was more precise. He hit Silas square in the chest, the full force of his 75 pounds driving the bigger man backward, off balance into the snowdrift outside. The shotgun flew from Silas's hands, lost in the snow. "Get him off me!" he bellowed, flailing as Aries snapped and snarled, keeping him pinned. This was Jake's chance. He shoved Billy back into the chair. "Stay down!" He grabbed his rifle and moved into the doorway, peering into the maelstrom. The wind and snow created a chaotic, disorienting battlefield. He could see the dark shapes of Silas and Aries wrestling in the blizzard, a whirlwind of limbs and fury. Jake knew he couldn't risk a shot. He might hit Aries. He had to get closer. He moved out onto the porch, the wind trying to tear the rifle from his hands. Silas, with a desperate roar, managed to land a solid kick to Aries' ribs. The dog yelped in pain and was thrown sideways. Freed, Silas scrambled in the snow, his hand searching for the shotgun. "I'm gonna kill that mutt," he screamed, his voice raw with rage. Jake raised his rifle. "It's over, Silas, don't do it." Silas's hand found the gun. He started to bring it up, his face a mask of pure hate. In that split second, Jake knew this man would not be reasoned with. He wasn't aiming to wound, he was aiming center mass, but before he could pull the trigger, another figure burst from the cabin. It was Billy. He ran, not at Jake, but at Silas. "No, stop!" he screamed, tackling his partner at the knees. The shotgun went off, the blast directed harmlessly into the sky. The surprise tackle gave Jake the opening he needed. He surged forward, using the butt of his rifle to slam into Silas's shoulder. The man grunted in pain, his grip on the weapon loosening. Just then, Aries, recovering from the blow, rejoined the fray. He latched onto Silas's arm, his jaws locking with immovable pressure. Silas screamed, a high-pitched sound of agony and terror, and finally dropped the shotgun for good. The fight was over. Between the disabling bite from Aries, the rifle in his face, and Billy pleading with him to stop, Silas finally surrendered, slumping into the snow, defeated. Jake stood over him, rifle steady, the blizzard swirling around them like the chaos in his own mind had just hours before. He looked at Aries, who was bleeding from a cut on his side, but stood proud and defiant. He looked at Billy, who was sobbing in the snow, a young man who had finally chosen a side. And he looked at Silas, the source of all this pain. He felt no triumph, only a grim, weary satisfaction. He had faced the ghosts of his past, the violence, the fear, the helplessness, and he had won. He and his partner side by side, just like they were always meant to be. He herded the two men back inside, using rope from the woodshed to tie Silas securely to a chair. He left Billy untied. The kid was broken, not a threat. Aries, despite his injury, positioned himself in front of Silas, letting out a low, constant growl, a promise of what would happen if he so much as flinched. Jake stood by the shattered door, watching the storm rage, the rifle still in his hands. The war had come to his sanctuary. But this time, he had been ready. This time, he had won. And as the blizzard continued its assault on his small cabin, for the first time in 2 years, Jake Riley felt safe. The blizzard blew itself out by dawn. It left a world of profound silence and breathtaking beauty. The mountains were draped in a thick blanket of pristine white, and the rising sun set the snow crystals ablaze with a diamond-like fire. The air was clean, cold, and new. Inside the cabin, the scene was one of quiet aftermath. Jake had tended to Aries' wound, a nasty gash but not life-threatening. The dog was now asleep by the fire, twitching occasionally, perhaps dreaming of the battle he had won. Silas sat slumped in his chair, sullen and defeated. Billy sat across the room, staring at his hands, his face a picture of shame and regret. Using a satellite phone he kept for emergencies, Jake had called the county sheriff's department. He explained the situation calmly and concisely: an assault, a home invasion, and evidence of a large-scale poaching ring. The dispatcher, hearing the authority in his voice, promised a team as soon as the snowplows could clear a path. While they waited, a strange peace settled over Jake. He looked around the room, the shattered door, the mud on the floor, the captured men. It was a scene of violence. But Jake didn't feel the familiar tendrils of panic or trauma. He felt calm. He had met the enemy on his own terms. He had protected his own. When the sheriff finally arrived hours later, crunching up the cleared track in a heavy-duty 4x4, he found Jake on the porch, sipping coffee, Aries sitting loyally by his side. The sheriff, a weathered man named Thompson, took in the scene with a practiced eye. Jake's calm demeanor, the tied-up poacher, the scared-looking kid, and the majestic German shepherd who watched his every move. Billy, to his credit, confessed everything. He detailed the entire poaching operation, Silas's cruelty, and how they had acquired Aries. They'd adopted him from the military program under false pretenses, thinking a trained K9 would be a great hunting dog, but Aries was too disciplined, too loyal to his ingrained training. He refused to be an attack dog for their illegal activities. Frustrated and angry, Silas had driven him 100 miles away and dumped him on the side of the road, leaving him for dead. Listening to the story, Sheriff Thompson looked from Silas's sneering face to Aries, now resting his head on Jake's knee. "Some men don't deserve the loyalty of a dog like that," he said, shaking his head. He looked at Jake. "And some men do. You did a good thing here, Mr. Riley, for the dog and for this county." As they led Silas and Billy away in handcuffs, a weight Jake hadn't even realized he was carrying lifted from his shoulders. It wasn't just the end of a threat. It was the closing of a circle. The questions that had haunted him were answered. The injustice had been righted. In the days that followed, a quiet routine settled over the cabin. Jake repaired the door, making it stronger than before. He and Aries took long walks in the snow-covered woods, no longer patrolling for threats, but simply enjoying the profound peace of the wilderness. The nightmares that had plagued Jake's nights began to recede. They were replaced by a sense of purpose that he felt every time he looked at the magnificent animal by his side. He had saved Aries' life, but the truth was they had saved each other. Aries had given him a mission, a reason to fight back against the apathy that had consumed him. And Jake had given Aries back his life, his dignity, and his partner. One crisp, clear morning, Jake sat on his porch, watching the sun rise over the peaks. Aries came and sat beside him, leaning his weight against Jake's good leg, a familiar, comforting pressure. Jake stroked the dog's thick fur, his fingers finding the scar on his ear. He was no longer a ghost. He was a man, a veteran, a dog owner. He was home. The war inside him, the long, lonely battle he had been fighting for 2 years, was finally over. He had found his peace, not in the silence he had sought, but in the unwavering loyalty of a friend he had refused to give up on. Together they watched the sun climb higher, ready to face the new day. Loyalty isn't something you can buy or sell. It's a bond forged in fire and tested by time. Jake and Aries' story is a powerful reminder that our greatest heroes often have 4 paws, and that the deepest wounds can be healed by a love that refuses to let go. What does true loyalty mean to you? Have you ever had a bond with an animal that changed your life? Share your stories in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Let's spread the message that every life has value, and that kindness and courage can change the world. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more incredible stories that remind us of the best of humanity. Thank you for watching.